let's continue with the Fate Sorter results. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend that you do that. This video will pick up from number 40 and go on straight to number 1, so let's go. Number 40 is Hana. Now she's another character who's in her spot almost entirely for gameplay reasons. I think Hana is a pretty decent character personality-wise, supports with Korra notwithstanding, and is another good example of a more normal character done quite well. Gameplay-wise though, oh man is she fragile. Now I know Myrmidons / Swordmasters are supposed to be fragile, but Hana takes it to a whole nother level. I may have had mages get one-shotted a few times, but never in my entire series have I ever seen a promoted physical unit get one-shotted, as in outright one-hit kill by an enemy. That actually happened to Hana multiple times. The overall nerfing of HP growths in this game really mean that using someone like Hana with incredibly low defense is much more risky than it usually is, especially when evasion has also been nerfed. If Hana were in any earlier game in the series, she would be absolutely amazing, essentially a better version of Edward from Radiant Dawn. Having great strength, massive skill and speed, and decent resistance enough to act as a mage killer, the problem is dodge tanking is just not reliable in Fates with how they change the RNG. Case in point, I once tried to do it with Hana, put her on a forest, let the enemies come to her, the kind of thing that I do with Swordmasters earlier in the series. She got hit by 2 30% in a row and died. In any earlier game, I could have counted on her to dodge at least one of those 30% with almost guaranteed success. Here, definitely no. Basically, Hana is a terror on the player phase, but gets pretty much destroyed on the enemy phase, and as such it's kinda hard to know how to use her. You can't really put her on the front line, so you kinda have to keep her back and use her as a kind of precision assassin to certain enemies. I know she has good resistance, but she's not as good of a mage killer as ninjas are because she has no access to 1 to 2 range outside of weapons that kind of have crippling drawbacks like the Kodachi. And speaking of 1 to 2 range, Hana, being a samurai, suffers from the fact that Ryoma exists. It's kind of sad, really. I think Hana is a fantastic swordmaster. The problem is we have Ryoma, and he pretty much invalidates the existence of all other swordmasters just by his mere presence. He's bulkier than Hana is, he's got comparable, well, better strength actually with his weapon. Not as good skill and speed, but it doesn't matter, he still has enough, and he has permanent 1 to 2 range and higher critical rate, so it really feels hard to justify using her over Ryoma, and that's another problem. All in all though, Hana can still be useful at certain times on the player phase, and her personality prevents me from ranking her lower for her sheer fragileness. Number 39. Gunter. Now, Gunter might go higher up on my list after I played Revelation. I get the feeling that more is going to be revealed on that route, and I've already kind of been spoiled on a few things that, let's just say, he's going to have a much bigger role. But as it stands, Gunter is here. Gameplay-wise, he's pretty much your typical Jagan, which is kind of strange, since the series has kind of shied away from that. He's still quite useful for some of the earlier chapters, and even the chapters where he rejoins you on Conquest and Revelation. He is quite useful for 1 chapter or so, and then he pretty much is totally worthless. But even that still makes him quite useful. Personality-wise, I like his whole, cool veteran knight who acts as kind of a surrogate father to the army thing. I quite like that. It's a nice type of character. You see it often in the series, but it is always cool. That's all I can really say about him, so on to 38. Benny. Benny is almost in completely the opposite situation to Hana. Personality-wise, I find him a little boring. He's basically a fairly generic character type that I've seen many times before. Gameplay-wise though, Benny really helped me, and he's probably one of the best armor knights and generals I've seen in the series in ages. Generals, in no pun intended, general, are a lot better in Fates, and I really like that because they've always been my favourite class in the series. And Wary Fighter is just great, it helps them tank a lot better than they used to be able to. And then Benny has his absolutely massive defense. He may not hit as hard as Effie, but if you want a wall, Benny does a fantastic job, especially since his resistance is surprisingly good for a general. I actually quite like that. We haven't seen that before in the series on an Armor Knight, and yeah, like I said, I quite like that. Next is number 37, Jacob. Kinda surprising, I almost felt like I would rank Jacob higher just for the sheer awesomeness and hilarity of his British accents. But in the grand scheme of things, there are other characters that I like better. There's also the fact that he can be a total jerk sometimes, though in my playthrough I mostly saw supports where he was nicer, so I have a better opinion of him there. Gameplay-wise, Jacob is... I like to consider Jacob and Felicia as the Oi phase of this game. A pre-promoted character that you get early in the game who has decent growth and is still useful fairly late into the game. Unlike most Oi phase though, they actually gain experience at the rate of an unpromoted character, so they don't actually suck up all your experience if you use them early on, and that's great too. Having a healer right from the start is good, and Jacob is one of those healers who can actually kind of take a hit. Offensively, he's not all that great. He's more specialized in strength and stuff, and in some ways I prefer the other maid you get, as you can see by the fact that she hasn't appeared yet. But overall, I still quite like Jacob. Number 36. Izana. Izana ranks surprisingly high for a Korin sexual, just because of how incredibly hilarious the few moments they appear in the story are. Izana is one of those characters I didn't know much about going into the game. I may have briefly seen their portrait, but I actually assumed that it was a girl. That must have increased the impact of actually seeing Izana for the first time and finding out what he's like, though I had heard rumours about it because he became a minor meme in the fandom circles towards the start of this game's release. There's also apparently a lot of controversy regarding how Izana is localized. Me personally, I see Izana as a fantastic example of localization done right. Reason being, Izana's character is pretty much identical in the Japanese version. The whole joke with them is, they look like your average calm, serene religious figure, they're expected to be speaking really uber polite language, and instead they are completely eccentric and speaking completely casual language. A lot of the ways they convey that in the Japanese script, from what I've seen of that scene and a few bits of the script I can find, those would all get lost in translation if you did a purely literal translation. Because yeah, basically the joke is, he's expected to use keigo, he actually speaks in really casual form. Also, there are tons of tilde and elongated syllables in his lines. None of that translates well into English. So the English version opted for totally radical speak, which in a lot of ways is a very, very good adaptation of how he would have come off towards Japanese players. Someone who's expected to sound super polite and maybe even archaic actually sounds like a complete eccentric and uses really casual language. It's the same thing that was in the Japanese version. In a lot of ways, I liken Izana to a non-psychotic version of Henry in terms of his humour, and considering that the one thing that I absolutely hated about Henry was his psychoticness being played for humour, getting rid of that but keeping the humour in his language, I really like what they did with Izana. It's also nice to see a very, very different sounding character from Liam O'Brien, who usually sounds very similar in a lot of the characters he plays. Number 35. Effie. As far as Armor Knights and Generals go, like I said, they've been improved a lot in this game, and Effie is a prime example, having absolutely enormous strength. I mean, more strength than I've probably ever seen on a Fire Emblem character before. The strange thing is, her defense growth is actually a little mediocre for an Armor Knight, and her speed is actually quite decent. In a lot of ways, she feels more like a lance-using fighter than an actual Armor Knight. And I guess that does work. Effie would probably rank a bit higher on my list if she hadn't been quite badly RNG screwed early on in my playthrough. Later on though, she completely picked up the slack. It helped that she was paired with Xander though, and ended up being basically a one-woman army like she's supposed to be. There's been a lot of controversy over her localization changes, but from what I've seen, all that really changed was her voice. Her actual character seems virtually the same as it was originally. Loves training, loves eating, and is incredibly strong. Next is number 34. Flora. Of all the female Corensexuals, Flora seems to be one of the most popular, and I will admit that I was planning on marrying Kamui to Flora if male Kamui went with Nor. I'm really glad that he didn't, because he ended up terrible stat-wise, and Flora joins very late into the game, so waiting that long for an S support might be a problem on a route as difficult as that. As such, because I never really used Flora and got most of her supports, she ranks a little lower here than she probably will if I do use her someday, so this might be a bit of a provisional position. As far as her role in the story goes, I'm kind of neutral towards her. There's a camp that absolutely loves her, and then there's a camp that is incredibly annoyed at her fans, and hates the fact that the game just piles on so much to make you feel sorry for her. Like I said, I'm kind of neutral overall. Number 33. Midori. Midori ranks unusually high for a second gen on my list for a few reasons. Firstly, her personal skill is definitely one of the better personal skills in the game, actually. I've heard you can pull off some really game-breaking combos with it. She's also one of the more interesting and useful second gens statistically, with being, barring capturing or reclassing, the only apothecary in the game. She also ranks a bit higher for me because her medicine specialization is a unique trait that I've never seen in a Fire Emblem character before, and that makes her character a lot more interesting. Unlike Hana, they have a lot more to differentiate them from just being an adorable child with nothing else to them. It also helps that I actually ended up using them in my Conquest run, and they actually proved fairly useful. Shame that I didn't get a chance to use her in the final battle, but towards the end of the game, she wasn't doing much damage outside of lethality. She was getting lethality very often, though. Next is 32. Felicia. Like I was saying with Jacob, I like the build of the other maid in this game a bit more. I prefer Felicia's higher magic because not only does that make for better healing, it also makes for better damage dealing because once you get a flame shuriken for her, she pretty much wrecks everything. I don't think I ever really got a chance to do that with her, but definitely sounds useful. Plus, reclass to a strategist she'd be pretty amazing too. Other than that, I mostly have the same opinion on Felicia as I do Jacob. A pre-promote who joins early on, and that you're not actually punished for using too extensively, because they still gain experience at a decent rate. This I didn't expect at all. I fully expected to avoid using her just to avoid taking up experience, but that was not the case, and having a decently leveled Felicia or Jacob is very helpful early on in the game, especially on Revelation, which you're about to see. I guess I'll say this here. My main complaint about Felicia and Jacob is that when you do the skip to branch of fate option, they don't inherit each other's experience. This causes a lot of problems, as it means that if you want to play through a different route with a different gender of Corrin, your best option is to play through the first 5 chapters again, because otherwise Felicia or Jacob is going to start at level 1, and believe me, on Conquest or Revelation, having a level 1 Felicia or Jacob in the first chapter of that route is a very bad thing. And the levels gained by the original one that are carried over are also going to be useless, because by the time the original joins later in the game, they're automatically leveled up to 13 anyway. So, yeah, Felicia or Jacob is the main reason why the branch of fate, the skip to branch of fate system is kind of not that useful, which is a problem. They could have easily fixed that by having them inherit each other's levels, like Nils and Ninian did in Fire Emblem 7, but I digress. Next is 31. Orochi is here mostly for being a pretty good character for comedic value. I like her trolling nature, but she also has some surprisingly deeper supports as well, like her ones with Kagura. What prevents her from being higher is her kinda not that great stat build. Massive magic but terrible speed, meaning that she barely ever doubles anything. This combined with having virtually no defense to speak of, yeah, I'd kinda rather use other magic users than her. And speaking of which, number 30, how ironic the two characters that I paired together happen to be next to each other, Hayato. The reason he's higher should be obvious from what I said about Orochi. Hayato actually has speed, and he also has a bit of defense. I think this is actually preferable to having massive magic, and it meant that he dished out a bit more damage overall than Orochi did, due to his ability to consistently double. Overall, I feel like Hayato in terms of stats is basically Ricken done right. My one complaint is him starting at level 1 on the Birthright route. That is kind of annoying, but at least you have access to grinding on that route. Personality-wise, again, I don't really like or dislike him all that much. People were expecting to really hate him, given that his quirk was supposed to be arrogance, but overall I don't think he's actually all that arrogant, more just overconfident and a little bit cocky, but not in a really, really negative way. Number 29. I guess Shigure gets extra points for being a male Pegasus Knight who isn't Tsubaki, but he's mainly here for being one of the second generation characters I find the most interesting personality-wise. His love of the arts is, again, something that's kind of unique for the series. And unlike Hana, the fact that he's the child of a major character is actually given some importance, at least in his recruitment paralogue. His recruitment paralogue being a very interesting chapter is also a plus in his favour, though it's annoying that he doesn't actually join in the paralogue itself only after it's over. I never really used Shigure all that much in either of my runs, but he seems to have pretty great stats and I'm looking forward to using him on Revelation. Number 28. Laszlo. Now, Laszlo's original incarnation Inigo ranked fairly high on my list of characters for Awakening, though not as high as a lot of people rank him. Back in Awakening, I felt like he was one of the more developed characters in the game, and I really liked that. Here, he does show a lot of that development, and in a lot of ways he is a lot more mature than he was before. But overall, for some reason that I can't quite put my finger on, he ranks a bit lower than the other, Awakening 3, let's just say. It might be due to his stat build. His stat growth build in this game is actually very bizarre. It's almost impossible to get an Inigo in Awakening that even vaguely resembles that. Back in Awakening, Inigo usually had great speed. Here, he seems to be one of the slowest of the mercenaries, which, not really sure exactly why they did that. There's also the fact that I never managed to promote him in my run of Conquest, so that's gonna mean that I didn't get a chance to experience his full potential. Number 27. Speaking of hidden potential, it's Dwyer. I'm guessing I like Dwyer a lot more than most people do, because apparently he's one of the least popular second generation characters, though I understand why. His personal skill is completely useless outside of my castle. To me though, that was pretty much the one negative thing about him. It helped that Mozu was his mother, thus giving him aptitude. This made him a very powerful healer, fully capable of taking a hit from both physical and magical attacks, which was very, very useful on Conquest. So really the main reason I rank him so high is because of how useful he was and how he eventually became my primary healer on the Conquest route, picking up the slack after Jacob started to drop off. Again, having a healer who can take a hit is definitely a point in his favour. Next at number 26, Silas. Silas is a pretty good character. He's actually got some pretty ridiculous growth rates. They're almost S-level growth rates. And he's got pretty great base stats too. It almost feels like they were trying to make the absolute best Cavalier of the entire series. And yeah, Silas is kind of ridiculous in that regard. But personality-wise, he's just a general bro and a nice guy, and that's great too. He's only really down here because there are other characters that I like more. 25. Selena. Selena is another one of those characters that I like a lot more than most people do. I've heard a ton of people who absolutely despise her, both in Awakening and here. I can kind of see why, but something that you do have to realize, her extreme bitchiness and cruelty in Awakening is partly a product of the localization. Possibly expecting that a tsundere would not be popular in the West, as they are starting to fall out of favour, the localization heavily rewrote Severa to be more of a bratty teenager with an attitude problem rather than just a tsundere. Unfortunately, they basically turned her from jerk with a heart of gold into jerk with a heart of jerk. And as a result, localized Severa, I can see why a lot of people don't like her. Having the Japanese battle voice clips on hand, it's really easy to tell how much she changed. In the Japanese version, Severa actually non-sarcastically thanks her partner for jewel striking, as opposed to the English version where she yells extremely screechingly bitchily, "That was mine!" Yeah, the moment that I heard that quote I was like, yeah, I can understand why some people don't like her. People say that she got a lot nicer in this game. If anything, it's more them dialing her back to her original Japanese characterization. The main reason that Selena is here on this list though is because, as you can no doubt tell from my reactions to her supports in the playthrough, I find Tsundere's hilarious, and to me, well, wait a minute, I shouldn't be calling her by that name, Selena was one of the funniest characters in this game. Speaking of hilarity, number 24. Like Selena, Setsuna is mostly in this spot for her sheer comedy value to me. I really didn't expect her to be like how she is here. It's almost impossible to describe her personality, other than it's just hilarious. But she also gets an honorable mention for, at least to me, managing to actually be surprisingly good of an archer despite Takumi existing. Her stats in general seem to be pretty bad except for speed. Unlike Tsubaki though, that's really all she needs, because with the sheer might that bows have in this game, having an archer who can consistently double, and Takumi actually can't, definitely gives her a bit of a niche over him, and I was surprised at how I still kept using her even after he joined. Next at number 23, Rinka. Rinka mostly occupies this slot because you get to know her quite early on in the game, and as a result, she's... Basically, I often find that in Fire Emblem games, the characters who are with you right from the start are the ones who tend to stick with me the most, from a memorability standpoint. And the fact that your first encounter with her is as a boss, which I wasn't expecting at all, is actually also pretty impressive. I like Rinka's character as well. She's not too quirky, but still interesting, and has that whole aspect with the Flame Tribe, though I am annoyed that we never actually get to go to the Flame Tribe in any of the routes, at least to my knowledge. In fact, I would have loved to have met her father, and maybe had him join as a pre-from route, because one complaint that I do have about Rinka, she is the only Oni Savage in the game, outside of reclassing, and I dislike reclassing, so I don't really count that. This is a problem because Rinka does have a few issues as a combat unit. Now, I don't actually hate her gameplay-wise as much as a lot of people do. I've heard people saying she's one of the worst characters on Birthright. I still found her quite useful right up until the end, for a great defense, and her low strength can actually be worked around with what was the club that has the ridiculously high critical rate? I forgot what its name is. Oh right, the Great Club, that's it. And promoting to Blacksmith helped out her HP and skill, so overall I didn't find her as useless as some people did. Though she may have just been RNG blessed for me, I'm not sure. But I do think we really should have got at least a second Oni Savage in the game. I was desperately hoping that one of the second gens would be one. They weren't. Because of that, Rinka is really one of the few people in the game that you can make an Oni Chieftain or Blacksmith. Those classes just seem really rare because she's the only natural one in the game, so I would appreciate a little bit more diversity in people of that class. Anyway, 22. Charlotte. Charlotte mostly ranks this high just because of how much she surprised me with her personality. She was the character that a ton of people expected to be really unlikable when they saw her in trailers. From what they showed of her in trailers, I almost got a Dahlia Hawthorne vibe from her. Someone who acts sweet and innocent, but is actually completely psychotic on the inside. Turns out, Charlotte was completely different to that. For one, her true self is more like, a lot more like Sully or Chell in Awakening. An extremely masculine female character. And the reason for her fake personality is she's absolutely terrified that no one will accept her if they knew who she really was. I didn't expect her to be a much more deep and complex character. Not only that, but she's only a gold digger to help out her poor family. Plus, she has some really great supports in general, so yeah, Charlotte, much more of a likable character than I thought. Though, sorry the millions of people who do it, I don't like Charlotte and Xander, I prefer her and Benny. Gameplay-wise, she's pretty much what you'd expect from a Berserker. Massive strength and speed, critical rate, but bad at everything else, but what does that matter? As is a recurring theme with me though, she seems to have been a little bit RNG screwed for me in my playthrough. She didn't have nearly as much strength or speed as she should have had, so I'll have to try her out on Revelations. Number 21. Sakura. Sakura is a great healer and a great character overall, but as you can tell, I like some of the other royal siblings a little better. The main thing that makes me rank her this high is simply Conquest Chapter 22. Just how amazingly she showed her hidden strength there, that made me respect her so much as a character. I like to say that, unlike any of the other siblings, she didn't get a boss intro cutscene, but she didn't need one. Her battle quotes are awesome enough as it is. Gameplay-wise, she's pretty much your average Lena archetype healer, and she does a pretty good job of that. She's also got a great buff skill. One thing that does kind of drag her back in that area to me is that her, well, at least one of her promoted options is the one that you're supposed to go for is more physically oriented. So she's not quite as offensively powerful as her counterpart on Conquest, but she is still very good. Okay, we're finally getting into the real favourites of mine, the top 20. So, who is number 20? And that is Azura. Some people might wonder why Azura ranks lower on this list for me, and I don't really dislike Azura at all. There are just other people that I like a bit more. I think that she's pretty decently developed as far as major characters go. A lot of people really don't like her for that one decision that she makes in Conquest, the plan that she proposes, but I actually feel like they didn't really have that many other options on that route. Gameplay-wise, she's a dancer-type unit who are always useful. Now, here's one problem that I have with her though. People kept telling me that Azura is an amazing combat unit. My reaction was, really? I don't see that. Not at all. Sure, her strength, skill, and speed are insane, but she dies in one hit from literally everything. That is not a great combat unit. Some people said that my Azura was a little underleveled as well, but that's because I just simply did not have the ability to have her kill anything for more experience, because I didn't want to expose her to any attacks at all. She gets one-shotted by pretty much everything in the game. And just like Hana earlier, if she was in an earlier Fire Emblem game where dodge tanking was more reliable, she would be pretty amazing, and I'd be fine with putting her on the front lines. But in Fate, dodge tanking is no longer reliable. You just can't rely on people to dodge anymore, and as such, Azura will just go splat if you put her on the front lines, I've found. Now, I think in order to make her better in that department, you're meant to reclass her to Sky Knight. The only reason I didn't is because I really didn't want to lose her making other people move again ability, because seriously, that's the main reason why I deploy her in the first place, and yeah. On Revelation, I'm going to try her out as a Sky Knight for a bit and see if that improves her durability somewhat. I really, really hope it does, because I really don't want that great strength, skill, and speed to go to waste. Oh yeah, also doesn't help that, as a songstress, her lance rank is incredibly hard to rise, and it only caps at C, so she's not going to be using much in the powerful weapons department anyway. So next, number 19. Kagura. I will say this, if marrying male Corrin to a first-generation female didn't erase a child forever, Kagura would probably be my main choice of waifu. Other than that though, I think Kagura is a pretty interesting character. Like a lot of other people that I mentioned before, she's one of those not too quirky but still interesting characters. Gameplay-wise, she's pretty great. Massive strength, massive speed, not so good everything else except maybe a bit of resistance, but really she doesn't need much else. She just tears through everything, even with her weapon's low might. I am also really, really excited because on Revelation I think I'm going to be pairing her with Arthur, and yeah, her getting Berserker, that is a really, really cool prospect. That strength growth on a Berserker, yeah, that's going to be insane, even with being restricted to E-rank access for ages. She is going to wreck everything. In general, the ninjas are going to rank quite high on my list for me, because I really like the class. It does a unique niche that no other class earlier in the series has done, being a dedicated anti-mage unit. Well, Pegasus Knights kind of did that, but they needed javelins to do that. And if I would see any class return in a future Fire Emblem game, they should definitely carry over Ninja, or at least an equivalent of Ninja. Anyway, number 18, Viloria. Viloria is probably mostly here because she ended up being an endgame party member in my Conquest run. She didn't quite have as much strength or HP as her father did, but she had more defense and better speed, so she was still useful. Wolfskins in general I find are pretty much completely ridiculous, but almost necessary later on the Conquest route. Their only real weaknesses being Beast Killers and Poison Strike, and so Viloria, she pretty much wrecked everything towards the later part of the game, and was a real part of me getting through the end of the game on Conquest, so Viloria's mostly here for that, though I admit I really like her supports with her mother, those are great too. Unfortunately, she didn't inherit any of her parents' tsundere-ness. I am looking forward to the unique parent-child conversations where I can see her mother-child conversations with Selena. That's going to be pretty cool. Next, 17. You're probably noticing a pattern here. Caza was another one on my endgame conquest team, and as a result get a spot here for just how much he helped me through the tougher parts of the game. With his sheer mage-killing skills, he was the absolute premier mage killer on my team. And yeah, with his massive resistance, So here's something weird that I noticed. Kaza's resistance growth is equal to Arthur's speed growth. Yet Arthur's speed ended up abysmal and Kaza's resistance ended up skyrocketing. That's just weird luck for you. Admittedly, Caza does get 5 extra resistance growth as a Master Ninja, but still, kind of weird luck that way. And as a character, he's another person who's with you right from the start, and you fight him as a boss originally as well, just like Rinka, so that immediately made him memorable to me. There's also the fact that he's playable on both routes, that's good too. And coming in at number 16 is a really fitting result. Sizor. Yes, the two brothers ended up next to each other. I will fully admit, I don't like Sizor as much gameplay-wise as the other two ninjas. Why does he rank above them on my list then? Well, it's mostly because of his sheer ability to get really fluky low percent criticals across all of my playthroughs. Even when that would work against him, like when he was an NPC on Conquest. That's something that'll just, endear him to me in my playthroughs. I'll remember that for quite some time. Oh, also his special boss conversation with Kotaro is amazing. One of my favourite special boss conversations in the entire series, and he ranks high just for that alone. Next is number 15, Percy. Remember how I said with Hana that I generally don't like adorable child designs in Fire Emblem? I'll make an exception for Percy because he's just that awesome of a character. His pit voice acting definitely helps there though. Percy is a character that I took to the endgame on Conquest, even though I really shouldn't have because he ended up very, very bad on my playthrough. Camilla was basically just better in every single way, but I still continued to use him for sentimental reasons because his parents are, well, you'll see. That's part of the reason why he's so high for me. I admit that he's not all that great, well at least he wasn't all that great with the pairing that I did, but I still like him for sentimental reasons, mainly due to being the child of two of my favourite characters in the game. Also, is it just me or does his art here look a lot like Nino for some reason? Anyway, number 14. Joining the ranks of I don't like the second gen but I'll make an exception for you is Spear Ike, aka Shiro. He is mainly here because, I don't know if I'm the only one who's done this, I've noticed a really big resemblance between him and Ike, both in personality, appearance, and in stats. And considering Ike is one of my favourite Fire Emblem lords just for how incredibly powerful he is, I like Shiro quite a lot as well. Also, Shiro just epitomizes to me why soldier, well, halberdier, spear fighter in this game, why we need playable halberdiers, because it just really epitomizes just how cool the concept is. Balanced stats overall in strength, skill, speed, and defense, and actually just only using lances surprisingly still works. He was, to me, in basically every way, Ike with a spear, and, well, that pretty much sums up why I rank him so high. Next is 13. Azuma is another character who ranks high for sheer comedy value. And in my case, I found Azuma to be one of the absolute most hilarious characters in the game. He just has some great lines all around, and it's just kind of amazing how well his personality works for that. He strikes, at least to me, a good balance of being a troll without being actively malicious. Overall, he can be kind of a jerk to others, but it's mostly jokingly, or at least you can tell it's jokingly. And whenever he is genuinely being harsh to someone, it's always for a very good reason. To me, I don't get the sense that he's just bullying people because he likes seeing them suffer like Niles. Asuma is more of the friendly troll type of character, and as a result, yeah, I find him hilarious. It also helps that he's pretty much the first physically inclined healer class who manages to pull off that build really, really well by just being absolutely great strength-wise. In fact, he's almost the closest thing Hoshidor has to a general class. Main complaint with him gameplay-wise is his personal skill is effectively useless after he promotes because you don't want to have him with a weapon unequipped due to his high strength stat, trust me. Next is number 12, and this is kind of a weird one. Carden. You know, to be honest, I'm actually not sure why Carden ranks this high. If I did the list again, he'd probably be lower. This is more of a fluke result than anything else. Though, I do think his class is quite good. In fact, he's one of the only characters in this game that I can find does dodge tanking semi-reliably, and he's also a pretty good mage killer. That and Beastbane helps him destroy the paladins and great knights that you often see later on Conquest. Also, I do quite like his personality. He's just genuinely a nice person all around, and that's always good with me. But yeah, in all honesty, I don't know why he's this high. He'd probably be lower if I took the test again. Next is number 11. My highest ranked second generation character, Afilias. It's pretty obvious why I rank her this high. She's the child of one of my favourite characters in the game, and in my first Conquest playthrough, she was the child of female Corrin, and actually proved to be pretty awesome for it. As much as I really ended up not liking the S support between female Corrin and Odin, I do like female Corrin as Aphelia's mother. Aphelia's whole Chosen One talk really fits when her mother is the chosen wielder of the Yator. And because of that, she ended up having access to the Nor Noble class, which her stat build was pretty much perfect for. And yeah, she got to turn into a dragon, which made her even more awesome. Personality-wise, I will admit that she is basically just a female version of her father. I kinda let that slide because her father is one of my favourite characters in the game. So yeah. I will say I was very impressed by her voice actress's performance as well, especially knowing that this is actually, I think, her first role that she's done anything in. I was surprised. I would have thought that it must have been a veteran doing her voice because it was done quite well. And with that, it's time to make our way into the top 10 at last. Rounding it off, number 10. Oboro. I think I'm of a similar opinion to a lot of people here. Oboro seems to be one of the most popular non-royals in the game, and I can really see why. I actually feel that Oboro has some of the best written supports in the entire game. And overall, her character is quite well done. She has a few eccentricities, but she's not built around one defining trait. And in particular, her supports with Takumi really surprised me. I expected them to go the boo-hoo why won't Senpai notice me route with them, just like with Cordelia, but they didn't. She's actually surprisingly normal around him and only explicitly shows her feelings in the S support. I will say Oboro and Takumi is my absolute favourite pairing in not just this game, but one of my favourite pairings in all of Fire Emblem. But Oboro is mostly in this spot on my list just for her herself, not for any other characters she relates to. She is just that good of a character in my opinion. Plus, it also helps that she is like basically a halberdier, and those are always cool. Though I think she got a bit screwed in my run. She should have been a bit better. Next, number 9. Holy crap, how did a Corrin sexual rank this high, you may ask? Well, that's probably because I married male Corrin to her in my birthright run. But other than that, Scarlett has something that a lot of the other Corrin sexuals don't have. Actual plot relevance. Unlike, say, Reina, if you pretended Scarlett didn't exist, the plot would actually change quite a bit. Even though she does disappear after a few chapters, what little story role she does have I actually find quite interesting, so she ranks this highly on my list. Of course, the main reason she's here is you need to marry male Corrin to one of these characters if you don't want to erase a child forever. Out of them, I picked Scarlett mostly because of her plot relevance. I thought, you know, it kind of makes sense to have her being more involved in terms of towards the main character because she's more involved in the plot. Unexpectedly though, I ended up quite liking male Corrin and Scarlett as a romance. In fact, you see a bit of hints of romance even before the S support, and it's generally quite a heartwarming one, and also kind of funny as well, with male Corrin being a complete utter dork in the S support and her calling out on it, but, and this is important, still pointing out that she loves him anyway. I didn't really get that with the female Corrin pairing I did, Odin, so I ended up liking this one a lot more. And yeah, I know a lot of people are going to get on my case for that. Seems like on the internet, the only pairing you're allowed to ship for Scarlett is Rama. I actually really like Corrin and Scarlett. I know it's the only male Corrin pairing that I've done, so I have no frame of reference, but it is actually my favourite so far. Again, that's bit of an overly narrow thing, but I still think that even if I did do other Corrin pairings, I'd probably still rank this as one of my favourites. Not to mention it gives a happy ending to a character who doesn't get to be happy very often, let's just say. And considering what I just said, the next number is going to be kind of funny. Number 8, Ryoma. I think the older brother characters are some of the best in this game, and to me, the royal siblings being such good characters in general, possible exceptions of Hinoko and Camilla, redeem Fates' kind of meh plotline. As the characters that the story mostly focuses on, and the fact that they play the role of both protagonist and antagonist depending on which side you choose, I feel that the two older brothers are done very, very well as characters. With Ryoma, you get to see his nicer qualities, but in particular, I really like how much they explore his flaws on the conquest route, mainly his impulsiveness. In some ways, he almost feels like a Shakespearean tragedy character. If he wasn't so quick to jump to conclusions about what happens later on Conquest, then maybe he could have avoided the situation that he got himself into. As it stands though, he rashly just immediately went into roaring rampage of revenge mode, and that caused quite a few problems. If he hadn't done that, who knows, maybe Corrin could have convinced him and maybe he could have survived. But as it stood, he was forced to, well, I don't want to give any explicit spoilers, but I will say his final scene is very good. Speaking of his final scene, I am quite surprised Ryoma ranks this high for me simply due to how utterly nightmarish his chapter was. I still don't like that chapter, but Ryoma is a cool enough character that he gets away with it. Ryoma in gameplay, well, this is actually a major point against him for me. I honestly feel like Ryoma definitely leans too far towards too broken. He pretty much totally trivializes Birthright from the moment he joins, and it's an already easy route. It also makes it hard to justify using any other samurai over him. And for this reason, as well as being a little less interesting on Birthright than he is on Conquest, the other big bro eclipses him at number 7 on my slots. Xander, I almost feel, is just like a great big brother character all around. He's a strong leader, he's supportive, he's like the pillar that all the other siblings turn to. He's basically everything I want to be as a big brother. At least on the Conquest route. He's kind of in the opposite situation to Ryoma. On Birthright, he does come off as a bit of an idiot. On Conquest, he actually does justify why he followed Garen at the end, and it does make a lot of sense. He was desperately hoping that his father would go back to the man that he remembered, and he just clung on to that false hope and couldn't let it go. It feels a lot more realistic to me. On Birthright, his final moments kill a lot of respect that I had for him on that route, and he is in general much more antagonistic there. But I do like that because that does show, like I said with Ryoma, the route within the antagonist, explore the siblings' flaws a bit more. In Xander's case, he absolutely cannot forgive Corrin for abandoning the family that raised him. And that just goes to show just how family-oriented and how much Xander cares in general. Sadly, he doesn't realise just how much he's destroying his own family until it's too late. For these reasons, I find Xander marginally more interesting than Ryoma. Even as a gameplay unit, now Xander is also pretty overpowered, but there's a difference. Ryoma is a ridiculous game breaker in a route that's already easy as it is. Xander is a ridiculous game breaker in a route where you desperately need one. I don't even know how I would have got through some of the later Conquest chapters without him. And yeah, I feel like I can accept Xander's brokenness a lot more, given that he's on a route that is tough enough that you really need someone that strong. And as such, he ranks higher than Ryoma for me. Next at number 6, Takumi. Yeah, the character that most people have as number 1, Takumi ranks at number 6 for me. Don't get me wrong, I still think Takumi is a really good character. I'm just not totally sure whether I'd buy the opinion that he's the best developed character in the game. I still think he's very well developed, I just think there are other people who have a bit more development than he does. I guess it's also a little bit of hype backlash. When I keep being told Takumi is so great, he's such a well-developed character, he is the absolute best developed character in the game, it's easier for me to think otherwise. But in general though, Takumi is pretty good. His flaws, like I said with the other siblings, are explored quite a bit when he's an antagonist, in a very, very insane way. But as a protagonist, I will admit that he does get over his trust issues a bit too quickly on Birthright. but he does have some pretty great supports overall. Of course, the main reason why he is so high is for he is Takumi the Broken. He is the broken one who has single-handedly redeemed the Archer class. So yeah, Archers in most Fire Emblem games, other than Radiant Dawn where they were amazing, were pretty terrible, as both bosses and as playable characters. Takumi smashes that out of the park on both counts. And here's the thing, Takumi may be a ridiculous game breaker when playable. I'm totally okay with that, because Archers needed one. It feels so refreshing to have a ridiculously good sniper when they've been so bad in earlier games. Also, unlike Ryoma, at least he doesn't start out promoted, so you at least have to work a little bit to get him up to scratch. Unlike Ryoma, who's basically broken from the start, broken to end, broken all around. I actually think that personally, despite what the memes say, Ryoma is a more broken character than Takumi is in this game. But anyway, yeah, and I will mention that Takumi single-handedly redeems sniper bosses in the series too. There's a very good reason you almost never fight snipers as bosses in earlier Fire Emblem games. They are usually pathetic due to their lack of ability to attack at one range. Takumi actually completely redeemed that, mostly due to gaining the ability to attack at one range, but also being a sniper boss who's absolutely terrifying. So yeah, just amazing how much they fixed snipers in this game. And with that, we come to my top 5. Number 5, Keaton. This may actually be a little surprising. Keaton was a character that I knew almost nothing about personality-wise going into the game. He was one of those characters who was never shown off in any trailers. We saw a little bit of him transforming in class trailers, but that was it. So all I knew about him was his appearance. I really didn't know what to expect. What I got was, well, amazing. Like I said with Selena, I find tsunderes hilarious, and he is one of the most hilarious tsunderes I have ever seen. I think, actually, I would classify Keaton as the funniest character in the game to me personally, and that's why he ranks so high on this list. Especially when he and Selena get together and have a tsundere off. That makes it even more amazing. But seriously, the whole idea of a ridiculously tsundere werewolf is just, I don't know who thought that up, but give them a medal because it's hilarious. Of course, he is also amazing in a gameplay standpoint. I don't know, he does feel very, very powerful. He has great strength, great HP, great defense, but still decent skill and speed. It almost feels like, what's the point of using generals when you have him? And also Beastbane, and a skill that can heal him on certain turns. Keaton was another character who pretty much carried me through the endgame of Conquest, and that's another reason why he ranks so high on this list. Next at number 4, it is the mighty Odin Dark. Odin Dark knows no fear. No matter what universe, he manages to continue to be simultaneously hilarious, yet awesome at the same time. For he is Odin Dark, and all those who think otherwise shall feel the might of his tome hand, for it twitches for glory. Number 3. I don't think there's any more I can say other than justice prevails! I just wish justice had gained a bit more speed. Number 2. Mozu. What can I say? I like Magikarp power characters. In a fandom where a lot of people absolutely despise them, but yeah, I love them. I think they did a pretty good job fixing a lot of the problems with Donnie in Mozu. Her promoted options can actually use Lancers, for one, and it doesn't feel that hard to train her because, as a class, Village doesn't actually feel that underpowered. It just feels like more like a regular class than an actual lower tier trainee class. And her promoted options are pretty great, and she also makes a very good archer. Even with aptitude being nerfed to only a 10% boost, it's still pretty good. And she overall learns some pretty great skills too. But it's not just how awesome her stats are to me, also her personality. I think it's actually really good. They didn't really go too much with the cliche survivor guilt kind of thing. Mozu is actually a much stronger character than you'd probably think for someone who went through her situation. And she doesn't actually angst all that often, and when she does, it's treated quite realistically. For the sheer strength she shows in adversity, she reminds me a lot of Sakura during Chapter 22 Conquest, except she's in that state permanently. And for that reason, Mozu comes in at spot number 2. And so, there is only one left. Who is number 1? Well, you can probably tell by now, but my number 1 favorite character in all of Fates is Elise. Now, I do admit I have a bit of personal bias here. Elise reminds me scarily of my own sister. But that aside, I feel like Elise is the absolute most developed character in the game. The role she has in the story early on Conquest, it helps that she's the only royal sibling that you have there. But the way that she acts as just a beacon of hope throughout the whole thing, even when things are darkest, and just the way that she is Corrin's constant companion throughout that part of the game, as their younger sister, but just always constantly supporting them. They're the first sibling to immediately rush to their aid. That just really, really endears them to me. Once the other siblings join, she gets even better. Her relationships with the other Norian siblings, I think, are the absolute pinnacle of this game's writing. It's just, I see those conversations, and I can actually see a real family of siblings really acting like that. It's just so well done, it just feels so real to me. Even on routes where you're against her, she is still completely optimistic and is still pushing for peace between both kingdoms, something that no one else is really doing. And yeah, things don't exactly end well on Birthright, but at least she tries, and that thing that she ends up doing on Birthright is one of the few, well, moments of that I actually think are genuinely well done. Unfortunately, Xander completely destroys it afterwards, but like I said, at least she tried. But Elise's flaws are still examined, in particular on Birthright. Her extreme idealism in hoping that Garen would actually be convinced to end the war peacefully, yeah, that's not really going to happen. And in supports, you see the deeper things that she's been hiding behind her optimism. In particular, the insecurities she has over her relationships with both Corrin and the other siblings. It's all just really well done. Part of the reason that she and Arthur are both in my top 3 and that Percy is so high is because I did pair them in my first Conquest run, and oh man, those supports are just really great for character development for her. You find out about her relationship with Xander, possibly even more than in her support for Xander himself, and yeah, I just love those supports. And she's not just here for her character. Gameplay-wise, Elise is now my favourite healer in the entire series. Being the first healer you get on Conquest, that's definitely a point in her favour. Being mounted means she can get where she's needed easily. She starts out with a free staff, so she can do things other than just healing. And then she promotes, and then things start dying en masse. Elise's growths basically are your average fragile troubadour build on complete steroids. Her magic, speed, and luck are all completely insane, to the point where it really doesn't matter about her low skill. Reason being, she basically annihilates every physical user with even a basic fire tome, which has so much accuracy that she doesn't even need skill, really. Yes, she's incredibly squishy and dies in one hit to just about anything physical, but here's the thing, if you're using Elise right, she will never take a hit anyway. You will always use her either to pick off something that will die before it can hit her, or to attack something that can't counterattack. In those circumstances, well, rip anything, because Elise just destroys them utterly, to the point where only ashes shall remain, for her magic is just that ridiculously overpowered. One-rounding generals for a character like her, well, in early games they didn't have very fighter, yeah, that makes sense. But Elise is the first troubadour that I've seen who can one-round, reliably, consistently one-round heroes. That's pretty insane. For all those reasons, Elise is my #1 favourite character in Fates. So, that's it for mine. What was your list? Leave it in the comments if you want. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I admit it's quite a long video, and I apologise for that, but I just wanted to get all my opinions on these characters out there. Overall, I liked the cast of Fates more than I liked the cast of Awakening. And it showed in that I kind of cared more about my results on this sorter than I did about the Awakening sorter. And yes, I did do a Fire Emblem Awakening sorter for characters, so if you wanted to see that, just tell me. I'd be happy to upload a video about that. Wouldn't be as long as this one, because there's much less characters in Awakening than in Fates. Now, I also found sources for Sacred Stones and Genealogy of the Holy War, Fire Emblem 4, So if you want to see my results on those, tell me as well. Those would also be much shorter. Annoyingly, I couldn't find an Elib or Tellius sorter, which is kind of interesting because those two were definitely the most popular universes outside of Japan before Awakening and Fates came out, so kind of weird there are no sorters there. If anyone can find any FE7 or Path of Radiance / Radiant Dawn sorters, I would definitely like to do those, especially because Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn have my favourite cast of characters out of every game in the series, so I'd really like to see where everyone ranks on that list. So with that, I'll see you in the next video, which will hopefully be the start of Revelation. See you then.